board. Here I go. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded so that our members can take a look at it at their own leisure. If you're like me, it's about 2 o'clock in the morning when my brain won't stop, and I think I really need to know about this. So we will have this online so people can access it whenever it's convenient for them. I know that several of our board members are on here. If I can get you guys just to wave, I appreciate you guys, your support and allowing us to bring these topics to our members. And we've seen really good response and participation. So with no further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Representative Drew MacEwen of the 35th Legislative District. He is on the House Republican leadership team, serving as assistant floor leader. He's also the ranking member of Commerce and Gaming Committee and the assistant ranking member on the House Appropriations Committee. Drew is the founder and president of Falcon Financial in Union, Washington. He's active in a number of community organizations and also is a past president of the board of the Shelton-Mason County Chamber. So Drew.
Thanks, Heidi, and welcome everybody. Pleasure to be with you. And I look forward to hearing from Mark and Julia. They are great advocates for your businesses in Olympia, and they'll have a good insight here on what's going on. As you know, we're moving through these phases. We're going to see some counties move quicker than others. Mason County will be, once they formalize their application tomorrow, they'll be submitting that to the state. And I don't believe that the state will act on that in time for you to go camping this weekend in Mason County, but moving in the right direction. And there's a lot of moving parts to all of this, whether it be from the state level or the county level, as to getting this economy reopened. And you may see the legislature act sooner rather than later. You might not see us act at all until later in the year, and that can all change fairly quickly. So while we are moving through this process, keep in mind that the parameters on everything and what can and can't happen could change very rapidly, either favorably or unfavorably, depending on one's point of view. So I would just ask people to keep that in mind. And, again, if there are specific challenges that your business is facing that are not getting addressed, I would encourage you to reach out to my legislative office or to Senator Sheldon's or Representative Griffey's, and also any of our county commissioners. We have a pretty good line of communication there. So a lot of things unfortunately do fall through the cracks. We find as we work through these issues, and and so when those are, it's helpful to have those brought forward. So I look forward to hearing from both Mark and Julia on their perspectives as to what's happening on the retail and the hospitality side, and hearing from them, and also from Commissioner Trask on the county's plans. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Heidi. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. We appreciate it. So I know that Commissioner Trask will be getting on today's webinar. She is not on quite, oh, she is here. There you are. You're under County Commissioner, not under Sharon Trask. So just to give you a little bit of background about Sharon, she was elected in 2018 and is the chair of the County Commission. And she serves on a variety of boards, councils, and commissions, including the Washington Association of Counties Board of Directors, Pack Mountain Workforce Development Council, the Lodging Tax Committee, Mason County Finance Committee, to name a few. Prior to taking her seat in office, she has been a business owner, a domestic violence victims advocate, paralegal, and executive legislative assistant to the House Minority Leader at the state capitol. And she and her husband, Ted, have 3 children and 6 grandchildren. So Sharon, I'll kick it over to you so you can update everybody on the variance application and some other things that you're working on COVID-19 related.
All right, thanks. So I'm a person of a few words, and I hate cameras, so we'll make this quick and easy. We are doing our variance tomorrow. Our Board of Health, we will meet at 10:30. The commission will meet at 10:45. Our variance will be submitted by, I'm hoping by noon. It usually takes 2 to 3 days for the Secretary of Health, John Wiesman, to review. And then we should hear back by, we're hoping by midweek next week. And we meet everything. There is no reason they should deny us. Our businesses are ready. I think most people have their PPE and everything in order. So lots of guidance. So I think we're ready. We should be approved. Keep your fingers crossed and say lots of prayers.
Thank you, Commissioner. I know that people consistently have been asking us, how does the variance work and what can they expect? And while I know that you don't have a crystal ball to look into foresee the future, what is kind of your expectation of how this may work? Will it be well into June before we see being able to move into phase 2, or how do you kind of foresee this working?
Well, as soon as we're approved, businesses, as long as they meet all the guidelines, and there's pages and pages of guidelines for every business, as long as you meet those guidelines, then we're ready. And I think it's curious too. It's interesting, maybe, yeah, it's interesting that they've been adding other players to phase 2, real estate and fitness centers for 1 or for 2. So, and they keep moving the goalposts. So for quite a while, we've been asking them to follow the CDC guidelines, which is 0.71 per 100,000 people. They have finally agreed, I think, through pressure from the legislature, through WASAC, the Association of Counties and the Association of Cities, through all the pressure with everybody. I think they finally decided that the 3-week threshold was not something that was achievable by most counties, especially the larger counties.
Very good, thank you so much. So as we move into today's format, just a couple of things for you to know. As you wave your mouse over the screen, you'll see a toolbar on the bottom, and there you can click on chat. There you can either message directly Deidre Peterson, who is today's host on the webinar, a question to her, or you can put a question there overall. So I can see that Mark Johnson, who I'll be introducing here shortly, who represents Washington Retail Association, has already said who works for or owns a retail establishment. So if you guys just want to say I do, or respond in that to everyone, then that kind of gives him a heads up as far as who he's talking with and where you guys are at. So I know that a number of you are. Mark Johnson is, like I said, with the Washington Retail Association. He's the Senior Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs. He earned a degree in political science and a minor in economics with an emphasis in communications from Central. He worked for Bob Dole's presidential campaign and attended the 2004-2005 presidential inauguration, which I'm very jealous over. Outside of his professional accomplishments, he's a community leader who spends his time volunteering for Kiwanis International and serving as an Eagle Scout board reviewer. So with no further ado, Mark.
Thank you, Heidi. It's great to be here. Thanks, Deidre. And great to see you, Representative MacEwen, and Commissioner Trask. Great to see you as well. And thank you. And I'm delighted to be joined here with one of my partners, Julia, with the Hospitality Association. So thanks for inviting me. Retail is one of the key industries in the state of Washington. It's a main driver. As we all know, we're a sales tax driven state, and most of our revenues that run the state and our local governments comes from personal consumption of purchases of things. So when consumption drops radically, it really impacts our state coffers and impacts our local governments. So we need to get people back shopping again. We need to get retailers reopened again as soon as safely possible. Right now, phase 2 is set to go into place for the rest of the state. I applaud you, Sharon and commissioners, for applying for a variance to get open earlier. 9 other counties are already up and doing that in phase 2 in very sparsely populated counties, and the governor's just said 10 others can qualify, including Mason, and in my home county over here where I live in Olympia, Thurston County will be applying as well. So we need to get folks up and running because June 1st is, it may seem like around the corner, but every day that my members remain closed, more and more small retailers just can't make it and are failing and deciding to shut down permanently their stores and permanently lay off their employees. So every day is critical to this economy and to the very fabric of our society. So as it was mentioned, there is already in phase 1, which is curbside or retail to go, which is keeping a few of my members alive and working at it. One most notable member is Best Buy Electronics, has been doing curbside since the pandemic broke out, and they've been kind of an example for others on how to successfully do it. But some other folks have moved to curbside as well in phase 1. We've been pushing hard with the governor and legislative leadership to move to phase 2 before June the 1st. We were actually hoping that they would ease restrictions because the cases are dropping significantly. New virus cases are dropping. And we were pushing hard to have an opening pre-Memorial Day because we feel Memorial Day is the quote unofficial start of summer. And a lot of people, this is a big shopping weekend for folks, especially for seasonal retailers that sell things for outdoor use, patio and deck use, outdoor furniture, kayaks, canoes, fishing gear, all of that. Memorial Day weekend is a really busy and important time for those sales. So the sooner we can get folks open, the better and safely. So I sent Heidi and Deirdre 3 documents. One, the first 2 are easily accessible, phase 1, phase 2 for retail reopening. And then the third one was a demonstration of a safety plan that the Retail Association developed. For you to safely reopen as a retailer or other business, you need to have some real basic things in place before you start to operate again. Number 1, you need to assign somebody within your establishment to be the point person on the COVID-19. They need to be the office expert, if you will, and they need to be the go-to person for anything COVID related. It can be the owner of the store, a manager, an employee. It doesn't tell you in the directive who has to be that person, but somebody has to be anointed the COVID-19 expert in your store or business. Number 2, you need to train your employees on how to operate safely in this new environment that we're here about: sterilization, personal protective equipment, social distancing. They need to be trained. It doesn't have to be over-the-top extensive training, but they do need to know the basics about how to operate safely and work with customers while protecting themselves and protecting the customers that they have. A couple of key things in phase 2 we have to keep in mind. Any retail establishment will only be allowed to operate at 30% of their building capacity. So if you are set up by the fire marshal for 100 folks, when this phase 2 goes into effect, only 30 people will be able to come into your store at one time. And that for some people, that doesn't financially pencil out. They can't make it go. So some folks are choosing to wait until phase 3 when they are likely to have the ability to have more people in their stores to make it worthwhile to open and have their employees being paid and the store fully open. So stay tuned on that as well. Keep in mind too that to date, no store or no essential business or anything else has been cited for illegally operating or having a unsafe environment. Nobody has been cited. We're told to, there have been a few, notably a barber up in Snohomish, a couple of physical gyms have opened against the order, and very publicly so, and those have been told to cease and desist, but still no citations out there yet. So my advice to you is, if you're doing the right thing, you're keeping yourself, your employees, and your customers safe, go forth and conquer. I think it's extremely important. Closures and investigations will be conducted mostly on a complaint-driven system. So if somebody complains and says they went into your retail store and the place was absolutely packed, nobody was wearing any facial coverings, nobody was wearing gloves, nobody was taking any of the proper steps to protect the customers and the employees, you might get a complaint. But if you are exercising good control, and something's key here too is we need to, as retailers, give our consumers and customers the confidence that if they go into a store, that store has taken the right steps to be safe and protect their health. If the customer doesn't have that feeling when they enter that store, it's highly unlikely they're going to want to come back. They are looking for signs, plastic barrier shields at checkouts, contactless paying systems, all of the above. They're looking for signs that retailer has studied and has implemented the guidelines that are required to safely open and operate. So my hope is that, and again, I applaud the county for going for the variance right away. And every day that goes by that we're not open is more and more. We're seeing, unfortunately, retailers and other businesses go out of business. And most notably, you don't hear about the small ones in the news and on the evening news stations. You hear about the monsters. You hear about JCPenney filing for bankruptcy. You hear about J. Crew. You hear about these other monster national retailers, all of my members, and they're struggling to survive too. 2 months without any sales, people in their stores is really crippling them. And you're going to hear more of them, unfortunately, going out of business in the future as well and filing for bankruptcy. So let's get everybody back up and running. Let's get rid of the term essential versus non-essential. I think every business is essential, and every business, if they can operate safely, should be allowed to open and operate. That's what I'd like to say for now, Heidi, and I'd like to turn it back over to you. I really do appreciate it. I'll be on the call the entirety and happy to answer any questions or take any comments that folks may have for me. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. We have put in the chat there the link to the documents that Mark has referenced. We'll also have those up on our website, masonchamber.com, this afternoon. And we will have some time for question and answers at the end. But before we go into that, I would like to introduce Julia Gordon. She is the Director of State Government Affairs with the Washington Hospitality Association. She's been there for more than a decade and oversees their state advocacy and political programs. Her most recent accomplishments been leading the effort on the state's Paid Family and Medical Leave Act, which contained key provisions for hospitality businesses and employees. Julia is involved in a number of different ways. She sits on the board of Enterprise Washington, and she graduated from Western Washington University with a degree in political science and social studies. So with no further ado, Julia.
Hi, thank you. And thank you so much for the invitation to come here and share with your folks on restaurant reopening. I am going to share my screen. Oh, I am disabled from sharing the screen. Sorry. So there we go. So here I was going to do an abbreviated presentation of what we presented to our membership last week. That full presentation is available for download. Actually, it's available on YouTube for folks who want to see a more in-depth presentation on this. We were joined by both the Department of Health and Labor and Industries to walk through some of these new requirements, and a lot of what restaurants are going to be looking at are very similar to what Mark just presented. So I think some of these I can brush over here fairly quickly. So if we want to advance to the next slide, I'm happy to do that. So there's 21 requirements in our plan. The original presentation covered 19. I'll go over, I think, fewer of those. So we can move on to the next slide. And I'll start by what I think was the most talked about and the most questions that we had received in our original guidance, which was the customer log. And since that original requirement to maintain a customer log was released initially, there has been a change to that. That is now going to be voluntary. And I think that's really important for folks to understand. There was certainly a recognition that asking restaurants to collect that information and provide to the Department of Health was a little bit uncomfortable for a lot of folks. So we're able to move that back. So I'll start with the first requirement here, which is that tables have to be at least 6 feet apart, and that needs to be measured by chair to chair to ensure a 6-foot social distancing standard is maintained. Importantly, for our folks and for our establishments, we do have the ability to build or install a barrier if a 6-foot distance is not achievable. So we've heard from a number of folks who want to install a sort of a plexiglass wall in between booths, so to maintain distance and protection for guests, and that will be acceptable. There have been a number, I think, questions or pictures from across the country shared of folks installing sort of like a shower curtain or a clear plastic lining. Things like that would not be in compliance with this requirement. Really what the health department is looking for is a actual solid barrier that can be easily sanitized. So something close to plexiglass or like that. So that will provide an additional option for restaurant and dine-in customers. Moving on to the next slide. The guest occupancy for phase 2 is 50% of maximum building occupancy. And I think this is important to touch on. We're not talking about simply removing 50% of your chairs and tables or booths. It's 50% of maximum building occupancy. And then the same goes for any outdoor seating you may have. If you have an actual structure, patio, or deck or balcony, right? An actual structure that also has a maximum capacity established by the fire code. If you don't have one of those structures, you just have a parking lot or an open area or whatever, you would need to continue to maintain that 6-foot separation between tables. And again, the maximum capacity is, or maximum table limit is 5 for phase 2. So we can move on to the next slide. So this next one is pretty critical. In the original requirements, we saw there was a requirement for guests to have a reservation. We pushed back on that, letting the governor's office know that there are a number of establishments in our industry that just simply aren't set up to take and handle reservations. So instead we suggested, just let us figure out what the best option is to control customer flow in and out of the building. So we're going to need to have a really thoughtful plan about that, which could include signage, letting guests know when you're at capacity, so you can't take their table now. Some sort of ability to let folks know when their table's ready, so they're not sitting and standing in the waiting area, because you need to make sure that there's adequate social distancing there as well. And then you'll also need to think about how flow in and out of the restroom is going to work to, again, maintain as much space as possible between guests. Moving on to the next. So then there's also a requirement, and this requirement that you'll see in the governor's guidance is really targeted at fast casual or quick service restaurants. If you're not a traditional full service restaurant, right, you're offering counter service or whatnot, you still have to maintain the adequate social distancing. So you're going to want to put markers on using tape or something else on the floors, letting know customers where you're expecting them to wait or stand when ordering, and then also waiting for your order if they're taking it to go. If your quick service or fast casual establishment does have a seating or lobby area with fixed booths and tables that you can't move around, you would need to figure out how you're going to identify which tables are off limits or within that 6 feet, so they shouldn't sit there. Moving on to the next slide. And then there were a number of other items in our guidance that were fairly straightforward that we didn't feel like needed a discussion here today. But we're going to need to have hand sanitizer. Again, all parties and tables have to be fewer than 5. There was no exception in the governor's guidance for families or households that were over 5. So even if a single family comes in that is 6 or 7, you'd have to split those up among different tables. Again, strongly suggested that customers wear face coverings, but it's not required. Buffets and salad bars are not allowed in phase 2. And we're ready to sort of move on to the next slide and employee requirements. So very similar to what Mark went over for retail, and I think any business who may not be identified specifically in phase 2, but is coming up in a subsequent phase, you can expect that a 6-foot minimum separation between employees is going to be a requirement. And we can expect that, I think, continuing to phase 3 and phase 4 as well. And this is something that Labor and Industries is pretty strict on, that we maintain a 6-foot separation at all times between employees and customers. There's just some interactions where that's not possible, right? When you're dropping off drink or food or taking payment. And in those situations, we need to provide employees with appropriate PPE, which we'll get into in a little bit. But there's, I think, a number of situations, if you are operating a restaurant, you think about employees who are working in close quarters, especially in the kitchen. What Labor and Industries is going to be looking at is, did you think about and make every possible accommodation you could to make sure employees were 6 feet apart? And they're thinking about, did you think about staggering schedules? Did you think about maybe moving someone's workstation a little bit further away? Things like that. So they're going to want to make sure that you really try to achieve that 6-foot distance. And if not, that employees are provided additional safety equipment. So moving on to the next slide. So what is that safety equipment you need to provide? Employees need to be wearing a cloth face covering at all times, unless they are working alone. So if you have someone working alone in the kitchen, then that's fine. Again, this virus is not foodborne. Again, I think seeing folks in the kitchen wearing a face covering may be something you want to consider if you have, it might make guests feel more comfortable, but it's not a requirement if you have employees working alone. And so I want to make sure that we provide employees with face coverings that are cloth. There were a number of questions about the surgical masks, or some folks call them paper masks, but those are considered a step above cloth face covering. So if you have those types of masks, you can provide those to employees as well. Also, if employees have a mask that they prefer to wear, that is acceptable as well. When you have employees interacting with guests, taking payment, providing a pen to sign their check, dropping off food or taking dirty dishes, you want to provide employees with gloves, or make sure that they are washing their hands or using hand sanitizer in between each interaction. Moving on to the next slide. I think the next few slides are about establishing a housekeeping schedule and ensuring hand washing. These are things that are already in our wheelhouse. We do these every day. It should not be difficult for us to achieve here. And this is an important consideration that the governor's office made. Moving our industry into phase 2, we were able to demonstrate that we do really thorough cleaning and sanitizing every day. All of our employees are trained with food safety and sanitizing requirements, and issued a permit by the Department of Health. So this piece was really key to making sure that the governor's office knew our industry was ready to move into phase 2. So next. So screening employees, there have been a lot of questions about whether or not employers are going to be required to take temperatures. No, we're not going to be required to take temperatures of employees. We can. It is something we could do if that was a policy you wanted to implement. However, what really is needed is some sort of opportunity for employees to run through the symptoms of COVID-19 and make sure they're not experiencing them. So any sort of self-check or declaratory statement that you want to implement or put in place would suffice in employee screening. Move on to the next, and that's a quick overview of what our industry guidelines are going to be for dine-in service. I do want to also mention on our website, we have a more thorough overview of this presentation available. We also have an overview of what the Liquor and Cannabis Board is going to be looking at and enforcing. There's some key regulations that they're going to waive until we are back to business as usual. And then importantly, our membership also primarily includes restaurants and hotels. For the hotel side, the governor's office was clear that they didn't see any of the stay-at-home orders impacting hotels. They were identified as essential, and so they don't intend on providing any additional guidance at this point for hotels. We do, however, have a hotel best practices guide available on our website for download for folks who may want to implement that as well. It was put together by some industry leaders on what best practices they're thinking about implementing. So again, all of those resources are available on our website. Membership is not a requirement to access any of our COVID-related information and material. And I am happy to answer any questions.
So we'll go ahead and allow people to unmute themselves. If you have a question that you'd like to ask of Julia or Mark, now is your chance.
Hello, Julia. Scott Bernard. I own the Railroad Tap Station downtown Shelton.
Great.
I guess one thing I'm unclear on is bar seating. We have 3 bars in essence, 2 at the front window and 1 at the bar itself.
Yeah. Great question. So I think originally you saw that in the governor's order that they were allowing restaurants at 50% capacity, but no bars. They reassessed that as well. So now bars, restaurants, taverns, whatever, are all considered in the same category and can open at 50% building capacity with exclusion of the bar area. And what they mean by bar area is bar top. So a situation where you've got a service liquor bar, you've got an employee working on the other side of that counter, that seating needs to be closed off. If you have some sort of counter seating that is facing a wall where you don't have an employee on the other side or facing a window, that is not considered bar seating, that you can still use that seating. But of course, you'd want to think about the social distancing among patrons if they're not in the same party.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? I see some other restaurateurs and providers. I see Alderbrook and Lake Limerick. Do you guys have any questions about what has been presented? No? Okay.
Well, I guess I have another question. My kitchen, we have a pizza oven. It gets to 95 degrees in there. I can't imagine asking my cooks to wear a mask, especially those that wear glasses. It's just not possible. And I guess I can ask my server to do it, but we haven't done it so far. I'm not one that am fully bought into the concept that a cloth mask is the answer. So I guess I'm a little confused on what my mandatory requirements are.
Yeah, unfortunately, the requirement is unless an employee is working alone. So if you've got someone alone in the kitchen, they would not be required to wear a mask. But employees who are working together, if you've got more than more than one employee working, they've got to wear a cloth face covering. There are a couple of different options that the association has sourced that are intended to provide some sort of cooling option, but that's going to be a challenge we have to work through, at least for phase 2.
And Julia, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know when they first brought out construction projects that they have basically a no tolerance, that this is the requirement needs to be met. And if you can't meet the requirement, then basically you're not to open or to offer that service. Is that the same kind of understanding that you have for hospitality also?
Right. So in the actual guidance, it says you're not to open unless you can meet all of the requirements in that guidance.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any hands raised. Or Deidre, have you had any anybody? No. Okay. All right. With that. No, okay. So with that, I guess we can move into our closing. I know Representative MacEwen was also on. He's balancing between updating his party and also sitting in on ours. But I know that Drew has some information as far as what they've done to proponent moving into phase 2 and helping with some of these guidelines, et cetera. So Drew, if you want to fill us in a little bit.
Yeah, so I apologize. I'm doing another call at the same time here with my caucus. We're working on potentially doing a special session and what that would look like, and a number of items that would address some of the issues brought up in today's conversation here. So that's again, things can change rapidly. I do favor moving us along. I personally believe that between business, labor, and consumers, people will make the smart choices. And but we're in the meantime, we have these parameters that we're operating under, and at some point, we'll in the future we'll be away from all of this. But in the meantime, we've got to deal with it. So again, I would just urge that if there are specifics, Scott, you brought up the issue with the oven. I can't imagine doing that either. Those are the kind of things though that are good to hear about, and that if we can help lessen some of those restrictions, and maintain the health and safety, I think that's important that we do that. So, stand by. The legislature may or may not act in the next 30 days or so. I just don't have a clear answer on that at the moment, but we'll continue to stay in touch. And as we learn of new things, we'll pass them on.
Representative MacEwen, any estimates on how much revenue we're short so far and will be in the future at all? Any numbers out there?
So right now, there's, as you know, there's a number of numbers that we reference. We have the current budget, then we have that ends in this fiscal year of June 30th, and then we have the biennium budget, which ends next year at June 30th, and then amongst all that, we have to maintain a 4-year balanced outlook. So it depends which one you want to talk about. The estimate that we got a few weeks ago was that our 4-year balanced budget outlook is not balanced. It's minus $7 billion. That's a huge number. Which budgets that exactly falls into is a little hard to ascertain at this point. So, the current fiscal year that ends next month, while it certainly has taken a hit, it's not. You're not going to see, draconian things happen between now and June 30th. But we're more than likely going to have to make adjustments for the following fiscal year, which begins July 1st. Going through next year, June. So I don't know those numbers yet. We get our true economic forecast numbers in June. And I think it's June 17th, and it'll be able to better answer that question at that time.
Thanks.
Yep.
Anybody else?
Mark and Julia, I wonder if you would share with us your thoughts on it from a statewide perspective. What what does this phase 2 look like to your businesses? You've mentioned, both of you, there are going to be businesses that just can't open at 50%. And I'm wondering if there are any specific thoughts about, does that impact rural areas more because they have smaller establishments maybe, or anything like that you're seeing?
I'll take a real quick poke at that, Patty. Thanks so much for the question.
Sure.
So retail will only be at 30%, which isn't very much. So it's not going to be economically feasible for a number of retailers to reopen with staff and to pay all of their cost of operating. So a number of them are going to skip phase 2 and remain closed until the percentage increases or the restrictions are relaxed. And it's truly a tale of two cities for retailers out there. If you were declared an essential business at the start of the outbreak, the stay home, stay safe order, those guys are doing really well. If you're a home improvement store, you're a grocer, you're a Walmart, a Target, you're doing very well. If you've been watching the news, they're having their best quarter they've ever had in the history of their companies. Remarkable. But if you're an apparel store, a Macy's, a Penny's, a Nordstrom, you're dying on the vine, and you're counting the days that you can start to hopefully sell something. So it's been truly a tale of two cities, depending whether you're essential or not. That's why we're advocating strongly that the whole essential moniker should be getting rid of, and it should be, can you operate safely? And that's our battle cry. And you're very right. Some of these rural communities, they are going to be particularly hard hit from the shutdown because their reserves and the sizes of their businesses are considerably smaller. So they'll be struggling to come back out of this. Also, their governments, I feel for the small rural economies and governments of the town of Shelton and other cities that are going to be devastated by the lack of sales tax, B&O tax, and other revenues that they use to operate their governments. So thanks for the question. And yes, it's weighs heavy on our minds.
Yeah, Patty, a really similar response from the hospitality industry. We've seen sales decline as much as 80%, despite the fact that both restaurants and hotels have been deemed essential and able to continue work through this epidemic. It's just honestly been devastating for the hospitality industry. It really hits us with what we do, right? Where our industry is about gathering, it's about coming together, it's about celebrating. So it has impacted the hospitality industry, I think, uniquely. We've got about 140,000 employees who have been able to file for unemployment. By far, the largest hit has been the hospitality industry. And right, I think even with the ability to do to-go and delivery items, 40% of restaurants had temporarily close their doors, and we're hoping to get as many as those to be able to reopen when we can. So doing the to-go and delivery options is not paying the bills. It is not keeping any establishment afloat, and neither will moving to phase 2 at 50% occupancy. It's just helping our folks dig the hole a little slower. Again, I think we're doing all that we can to help our folks in our industry navigate out of this as quickly as we can and demonstrate that our industry is safe to open at full capacity as quickly as we can.
I know that we've, thank you both for your answers. I know we've received several questions as far as would X situation work for plexiglass barriers and working on the social distancing guidelines. And I know there's probably 100 ways to skin a cat. Is there any resource that people can look to have an assured, yes, this works or this fulfills the criteria?
Yeah, so assuming that's directed at me, Mark can answer for his folks, for his industry as well. But on our website, wahospitality.org, we have those resources available. As we get questions from members, we post sort of in a Q&A area, and we're working really closely with the Department of Health on answering those items as they come through.
And similarly, on our website, washingtonretail.org, we have an entire section dedicated to COVID-19 resources as well. And one of the good things about having those essential businesses operational during the initial days of the outbreak, where they developed a number of best practices that they've been able to share with our non-essential retailers. So it actually has been very helpful. A number of them, like the plexiglass shields at the point of sale registers, a lot of them developed these things as a response to the virus, and they have shared their resources with us and with the non-essentials. So it's actually been very helpful. All of my members are very in tune. I mean, normally they're fierce competitors, especially if they're in the same industry niche, but when the virus broke out, it was, we will share anything we have with anybody. And they've been very good about resource development and sharing best practices, where to get face shield coverings, masks, etc., PPE equipment. They've been very outright in helping each other. So it's really good to see that team spirit in the retail industry.
Thank you. Other questions before we move into closing? Deidre, any other chat questions that you received? No? Okay. I will kick it over to Pam Bowles. I know I mentioned her at the beginning, but didn't give her the chance to say hello and introduce herself also.
Hello, everyone. I am the President and CEO up at the North Mason Chamber as of March 17th. So if we all remember what day that was, it was interesting. So, you know, Heidi and the Mason Chamber and the North Mason Chamber have been working collaboratively to better the Mason County area and making the resources available and working with our businesses at both ends. And we just will continue to do that and bring those resources. I did just mention to Deidre, I spent some time on a meeting with the union group this morning. It was a healthy group, good discussion, and looking at the safe way for bringing the retail and hospitality back together up in the union area and how we do that in an organized way. And Sean at the Alderbrook is, you know, very cognitive of the stages they need to go through there. So there's really a great effort, I guess, is what I want to mention, is there's a great effort to just do this in a way that is safe for our community here and also continue to bring our revenues in the areas. So we're going to be offering from both the chambers opportunities and resources. I did connect them with the websites for the Retail Association and Hospitality Association so that they can look at the guidelines you have, because they needed those resources. So appreciate all of you, and we're going to make this happen. So thank you, and thank you, Heidi.
Thanks, Pam. So we've done our best to capture everybody who's on today's call, so we can link you to our resources on our website. We have created a back to business toolkit. Within that talks about a safety plan and some guidelines, as well as some methods for your employees to self-screen for COVID-19 symptoms. And that is, all of that can be found at masonchamber.com. And as I said, we will share all of the links shared today with both Washington Retail Association and Washington Hospitality Association, as well as anything else that we've discussed, so you can access that as well as this recording. Again, my great appreciation to Representative MacEwen for bringing together today's call, and especially to Mark Johnson from Washington Retail Association and Julia Gordon from Washington Hospitality. We appreciate it very much.
Thanks so much, Heidi, and Representative MacEwen and Deidre. Appreciate it. Good to see you, Pam.
Yeah. Thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I hope that you have a wonderful day and stay safe out there. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.